right, our final speaker now is Amber Flohm, the Senior Vice President from the New South Wales Teachers Federation.
Thanks, colleagues. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and of course extend that respect to all our Aboriginal friends here today. And I also want to thank you for how you've shown us how to welcome migrants and refugees across the centuries. We have learned from you, and we continue to stand alongside you as the union movement, as you have faced your battles of racism, as you continue to endure those struggles. We stand with you in the union movement. We are also proud, as the Teachers Federation, to proudly support the Uluru Statement from the Heart, a roadmap to achieve a voice to Parliament for our First Nations people, treaty and truth-telling. And we are well aware and remain steadfast in our commitment and role as educators to ensure that across all our schools and all our classrooms, we will make sure that that is taught, despite the political motivated curriculum that the federal government may seek to impose upon us. I stand here proudly today as a representative of the mighty union movement in New South Wales. The pursuit of peace and justice for refugees and asylum seekers is and always will be union business. The long and proud history of opposition to war sees us go back to 1918, when the New South Wales Teachers Federation started its Support for Peace branch and committees. And we sent delegates to Brussels from the Teachers Federation, then executive, in 1936 to oppose compulsory military cadet training in our schools. In 1958, the union movement in New South Wales joined the ACTU and the Labor Council, as it was then known. Their decision to call for world peace through negotiations and the abolition of nuclear tests. The 70s, of course, saw the Teachers Moratorium Committee work with others in the anti-Vietnam War movement, and so many more examples of the union movement working across civil society to oppose war and pursue peace. The New South Wales Teachers Federation joins other unions around the world, including Education International, the International Trade Union Confederation, civil society organisations and the global community in condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Let us be very clear. This is a crime against humanity. Since the Russian military invasion began, the world has witnessed countless deaths, the destruction of villages, of towns and cities, including the bombing of schools, hospitals, vital infrastructure and residential areas, causing the displacement of millions of Ukrainians now seeking refuge from the war. The Federation has a long and proud history of that opposition to war and a support for peaceful means to resolve international conflict. It was 1947, the UNESCO conference, that declared all wars are fought against children, a profound concept brought home by the then president of the Teachers Federation, Sam Lewis. which has been embedded in the culture of our union ever since. The current conflict in the UK, in the Ukraine, reminds us of the responsibility of all nations to pursue peace, to respect human rights everywhere, to recognise the rights of people to self-determination, to strengthen democratic institutions, to respect international law, to end military power blocs, to welcome and care for all asylum seekers and refugees displaced by conflict, war, climate change and famine, to abide by Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and to end the international arms race. As teachers across the state, we remind the children and young people every day in our classrooms that actions speak louder than words. So these are their very actions. They have cut the humanitarian program in Australia 13,750 only for 2021, a ceiling, not a target. $811 million to offshore management, i.e. locking people up over the next year. 8.3 billion has been spent on detaining refugees and asylum seekers between 2014 and 2020.
Same!
A reduction of the SRSS, the Status Resolution Support Service, from 139 million in 2017 to 39.5 million in 2020. Shame. And a $560 million cut announced last week to public schools. Rather than spending, as has been outlined here today, on the increasing of submarines and nuclear efforts, we are cutting $560 million from our public schools because they are ideologically opposed to public education and public health and public services. And frankly, they're ideologically opposed to the public. Because we know, to famously quote, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. So let's have a quick look at that history, shall we? We know the history of this government over the last 9 years to exploit racist elements in our community, to marginalise members and sections of our community, to demonise asylum seekers and refugees at every opportunity, to inflict insurmountable torture and cruelty on our fellow humans in detention and those seeking asylum, to fuel racism through the parliament, through legislation, through media, and at every opportunity for their own political gain. We have stood together as members of our civil society for those last 9 years. We have stood together to lobby, to rally, to fight, to speak out against the government's inhumane treatment of those seeking asylum and refuge in this country. As teachers, we have watched as our children were pulled from our classrooms by immigration officials. We have watched as cars backfired and our children fled under the desks. We have watched our children in our classrooms be bussed in from local detention centres every morning and picked up every afternoon. We know the history. We have learnt from that history. and we will not repeat that history on May 21. The Morrison government does not deserve your vote. Vote them out. Vote them out. Vote them out. Vote them out. May 21, people. May 21.
Now.